I'm Dr. Desnay Marcy. I'm the Chief Strategist at IC Intelligence, which is a strategic advisory arm of IC Publications, and we also publish African Business Magazine and African Banker. I'll be your moderator for the session today, Defying Market Forces, Africa Open for Business. I'm joined on the panel today by some outstanding speakers. From the UK Department for International Trade, we are joined by Emma Wade-Smith, OBE, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Africa, joining us from Johannesburg, Henny Heymans, CEO at Express Sub-Saharan Africa for DHL, also joining us from South Africa. And a big welcome to Dr. Matt Lilly, CEO of Africa for leading UK insurer, Prudential PLC, joining us also from London, and to Sarmad Lone, Regional Head of Client Coverage, Corporate, Commercial and Institutional Banking for Africa and the Middle East at Standard Chartered Bank, joining us today from Dubai. We've been asked in this panel to consider the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy, which has been deep and profound, affecting all regions and disrupting many services and supply chains with major negative economic and social outcomes. This has been no different in Africa, which has seen a major economic impact, and lockdowns have been particularly damaging for the urban poor who live from hand to mouth in the informal economy, and for the budgetary situation of many of its governments, which were already heavily indebted with limited fiscal space to maneuver, and not least threatening much needed job opportunities. But one thing I really wish to highlight to the audience today is that the public health response in Africa, however, has been very robust and very competent, with many countries experiencing much lower fatalities and infection rates than we've seen in the US, UK, and Europe, having made the decision very early on to look at the public health management of the virus in Asia Pacific, particularly in China and New Zealand, where mass compliance with mask wearing and strict lockdowns have made a big difference. But Africa has also been a norms maker in regard to the management of the virus, with strong leadership, particularly in Rwanda, Ghana, and South Africa, using very effective methods incorporating learning from the public health sector during extra drug-resistant tuberculosis in South Africa and Ebola in Central and Eastern Africa, with airports such as Johannesburg's Tambo having permanent temperature checks already in place, learning from these experiences. I mention this because you cannot separate controlling the virus with opening the economy, as we've learned everywhere around the world. And the robust public health response has made business travels and meetings a lot easier on the ground in Africa, as Emma said to me when I spoke to her the other day. Then, for example, the United Kingdom, which just today has been plunged into a second very damaging economic national lockdown. But as the team at Invest Africa have argued today, South Africa's private sector will also have an essential role to play in driving job-creating recovery, providing a backstop against rising poverty alongside this public sector management of the virus. And businesses have very quickly learned to thrive in this new landscape, where innovation and flexibility are invaluable. So in this session, as you have heard, we'll speak to some of the leading business, trade, and investment leaders working on the African continent today, and they will share with us the strategies they've deployed to realign services and manage fast-changing risks, as well as their view of Africa's continued future as a high-growth investment destination and the sectors and strategies that will aid the road to sustainable and green growth. And last but not least, in the session, we'll look at how a sense of purpose and optimism has been the defining feature of resilience and recovery. So without further ado, in this context, I have asked our panel to provide our thoughts. We'll begin with Emma, who will set out her thoughts on the private sector and public engagement and her experience on the ground of the pandemic and specific UK initiatives. And then we'll go to Matt Lilly, who will take us to his thoughts on the public health response and the ways in which Prudential is working with African people and governments to support savings, health insurance, and financial inclusion so that no one is left behind out of economic participation and access to healthcare. We'll then go to Henny, who talks to us about DHL's footprint on the continent and how logistics keep everything going, particularly how inspiring his staff to deliver despite the challenging situation is key. And finally, Sarmad will talk us through the specific ways in which Standard Chartered has supported its clients during the pandemic. And then we'll go to questions. So, Emma, we go to you. Would you like to tell us a bit more about your role and how you've been finding things on the ground?
Great, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be part of this fabulous event. So I work for the UK Department for International Trade, part of the UK government. As Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Africa, I lead trade and investment teams across 23 different African countries. And of course, we work hand in glove with what is now the FCDO, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, a creation born from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Department for International Development. And we work hand in glove because actually we bring very different aspects and perspectives to bear, all of which combined, I think, make us an impressive force to be reckoned with. And of course, we work very closely with our ambassadors and our high commissioners across Africa to make sure that together we are well networked, we well understand the business environment and some of the market access challenges, and we're also well hooked into the business communities. So that's sort of the public sector, if you like. My role in the Department for International Trade is very much focused on how we then engage with the private sector. How do we understand that experience, that expertise? How do we connect that and match it with opportunities, either for exports or for investment that we see across the continent? So a really important role, I think, to help different business communities and government communities talk to one another and, frankly, establish more business. And fundamentally, at the very heart of what I do is about how do we help companies to achieve their business ambitions in Africa and hopefully increase those ambitions so that we're driving trade and investment flows between Africa and the UK. And we're doing that in a number of different ways. So if I start sort of big picture in terms of establishing the right trading framework, and of course, everybody will be aware that we're now less than 2 months away from the 1st of January 2021, when we will see the end of the transition period that the UK has with the European Union. And we've been working very, very hard over the last few years to make sure that we've got, as far as possible, continuity of those trading arrangements. And we've had some great news over recent days and weeks. Just yesterday, we saw the formal initialing ceremony for the UK-Kenya Economic Partnership Agreement. A few days before that, we had a similar ceremony with Côte d'Ivoire. We've seen the Tunisian Parliament ratify the UK-Tunisia Association Agreement on top of what we're seeing with SACU plus Mozambique and the Eastern and Southern African partner countries, and Morocco, of course. So taken together on top of the UK's generalised scheme of preferences and our global tariff, I think we're creating a strong framework to enable us to have continuity and then to be able to build onto that continuity in the years ahead. But also we've done a huge amount in terms of investment. Many of you will remember the UK-Africa Investment Summit back in January in London on a crisp, beautiful, sunny January morning in the city, and bringing together hundreds of African and UK government and business leaders to really demonstrate the UK's commitment to the African continent and our ambition to be Africa's investment partner of choice. And despite what's been going on over the last 9.5 months with the pandemic, actually we're full steam ahead on that investment ambition. So we have an Africa Investors Group, which brings together the public and the private sector, where we see the likes of Prudential featuring as a major UK investor in Africa, and really helping us to drive our strategy and to drive the implementation and practical effect of that investment strategy, which is around driving more UK investment flows into Africa. As part of that as well, we've seen a partnership with Asoko Insight, where we've had an online deal room platform, perfect for this day and age, where we are matching African investment opportunities with UK investors. And we've seen somewhere close to $750 million worth of deals coming through that platform over the last 9.5 months or so. So excited to see where that can take us in terms, again, of connecting investment opportunities with investor potential. And the story doesn't stop there. I mean, I know we're focused very much on investment, but I also want to just mention some of the work we do around entrepreneurship, particularly helping African startups through a number of tech hubs that the UK government has, one in South Africa, one in Kenya, one in Nigeria, and really helping to build the entrepreneurial ecosystems, to help build skills and help create more inclusive economies, where we're helping particularly young women in those through those tech hubs to create their technology ideas and realize those, fast track them through incubators and connect them with potential investors and entrepreneurs in the UK. So all sort of examples really of how the UK government is really trying to create a greater flow of business and enable business to do what it does best. I should also mention the Tech for Growth programme, which we launched a couple of months ago, which is really focused in on fintech and how we can help, again, strengthen Africa's fintech and insurtech ecosystems and encourage African entrepreneurs in those spaces to think about the UK as a place from which to grow their international business. Let me finish on the opportunities. Of course, these are incredibly difficult times for many, many companies, and we don't underestimate the scale of that challenge. We've spent over the last 9.5 months, a lot of time working directly with companies to support them through the difficult times, to help address some of the additional challenges and market access barriers that have crept in as governments have tried to manage the health situation, and trying to roll back some of those additional protectionist measures to make sure that we're still fighting for as free, open trade as possible. But we have a very strong focus now on how do we help Africa's economies to grow more resiliently, more sustainably, and more inclusively for the future. So big opportunities I see across the whole green economy space. So not just renewables, but sustainable infrastructure, bringing technology to bear in the agricultural space and agro-processing space, health tech, of course, and healthcare provision, education online and more accessible than ever through technology. And as I said earlier, fintech and insurtech absolutely flying in the African continent, as I'm sure Matt's going to tell us about in a moment. And as well, sustainable infrastructure. We've seen a number of governments focusing on infrastructure as a way to rebuild and to create jobs, to create economic growth and momentum as we look to recover rather than respond. So let me stop there, and very interested to hear from our other panelists as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Emma, before I pass on to Matt, I just wanted to highlight something. We spoke a bit earlier this year on the podcast, just the beginning of lockdown. And there are two things that come to mind from that conversation that I thought left me feeling quite positive about the DIT's interventions on the ground. When we spoke then, we talked about the fact that any UK business operating in Africa and any African business connected to the DIT network can get practical support and information. Do you maybe just want to talk a little about that platform for anyone listening so they know where they can access information and some of the networks and initiatives you've spoken about?
Absolutely, thank you. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for UK companies thinking about doing business in Africa or wanting to grow your business in Africa to get in touch with us and to talk to us about opportunities in any of those markets and indeed beyond the 23 countries where we have a physical footprint. So we have a single email address. It is dit.africa@fcdo.gov.uk, and we can respond and triage your inquiry and put you in touch with the best person across our network to take forward the conversation.
Absolutely. And then just one more. I think especially that we're coming very close to the end of the transition arrangement for Brexit. I think some of our listeners on the African continent will be wondering what this means for them. Also, when we spoke earlier this year in the preparations for the UK's exit from the European Union, Africa is absolutely in the top quartile of UK priorities for its international relations strategy. Do you just want to maybe talk to our audience how, the UK feels quite positive about the future of that relationship and Africa's quite key in those trade and investment partnerships?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I set out the number of different free trade agreements that we've been transitioning over the last few years, and so I'm very encouraged by the number of those. And I look at the UK-Kenya Economic Partnership Agreement, for example. We initialed it yesterday, and we did that in absolutely record time. And I should say, it's still very much open to any other members of the West African community to join that economic partnership agreement, and we very much hope that that will be the case. But underpinning all of that, we have, our generalised scheme of preferences, which we think builds on the EU scheme that we are still currently part of, and we've got a global tariff as well, which we think actually is also an improvement on the EU version of that, simpler, lower tariffs on the whole, I think across the board, much easier to navigate. So to try to make it easier for companies to do business and to see that continued access to the UK for African business people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though there are these big political shifts happening all over the world, I still need to, I don't even want to look at the US election results. So I haven't looked at my phone. I just have a heart attack when I open that. But basically, I think what I'm taking away is, there are these big shifts happening in the world, and they're underpinned by treaties. But, it's the relationships that we have as well. They're very strong historical, economic and political partnerships between the UK and Africa. And people like Matt, who on your UK investor group, are part of making that happen on the ground. Matt, so really looking forward to your thoughts on some of these issues. I thought I could start with what you thought of, given Prudential's footprint in healthcare, insurance provision and health tech, what your thoughts have been on Africa's healthcare response and some of the practical things you're doing to work with governments and people on the ground.
Sure. Thanks, Desney, and good afternoon, everybody. Maybe I'll go backwards a little bit in time and just sort of explain to you where we were when this thing started, and that sort of informs how we responded to it and what impact that had and where we're going to go in the future. So we're, as you said, we're a London headquartered life insurance company, but our largest business is across Southeast Asia, and we've built that over the last 30, 40 years, really on the back of secular trends that were present in almost every market in Southeast Asia. So strong compound economic growth, a young population generating in growing numbers of middle-class people in countries which have relatively limited socialized welfare provisions and low insurance penetration. And that creates a exponentially growing pool of people who have the means, but also the need to make their own provisions for long-term savings and for protection and for healthcare. And really, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we looked back and saw that those trends that we'd been able to harness across Southeast Asia were also very much the case on a macro level across most of sub-Saharan Africa. And so we took the decision to start building a business, learning and building slowly, because we know that we were new to the continent, and so we started investing in Africa in 2014 and did it bit by bit, and now we're in 8 countries in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Nigeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo, and we've got 1,000 employees and 1 million customers across the continent, and we've been growing at 50 or 60% a year on average. And we really are committed to building a business in Africa for the long term, because we see the same opportunity that we've seen across Asia, and that's evidenced by our own experience. And so we're hugely optimistic about the long-term future. And so we came into the crisis, if you like, in a really good position, because we had a very clear strategy about why we were in Africa and what we were trying to achieve, because we'd built over the last 5 or 6 years, through working with our people and investing in them as individuals, a really strong culture where everybody in the organization felt valued as part of the company, but was also passionate about what we do and what their role in what we do is. and we had momentum as a business. We'd been performing well, and so the business was doing well as we came into this. So then, when COVID struck, and February or March or whenever you wanted, our teams really just mobilized, and they knew what to do, and they made their own decisions about how they were going to react to it. But they took it as a huge opportunity to show the world why we exist as an industry. And really why they're so passionate about what they do. And sure, it was difficult, but we provided free COVID insurance to all our customers, all our agents. We donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to relief efforts across the continent, and things like providing food, providing educational materials, providing medical materials. We've changed our processes to find new ways to serve our customers more remotely, to make it easier to submit claims, to make sure our claims are getting paid quickly. We've waived pandemic exclusions in all of our policies to make sure that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that if you buy insurance from us, it's going to serve the purpose that you thought it had when you bought that product. And then we've had to take care of our employees. We run regular pulse checks, and one thing that they told us was that they were passionate about what they were doing, and they were excited about the chance to show people what we can do and what our family means. But they were stressed and worried about what it was meaning for themselves and their families and their lives. And so we've had to adapt our working policies to make sure we continue to be a good employer and a great place to work, and a place where people feel like we're making a positive contribution to their own lives. And so then finally, I suppose the other thing that we had to do, which has been challenging, but for all that technology is playing a role, and I'll talk about that in a second. Insurance is a complicated product, and a lot of times people need a human to talk to about what it is, what it does, and how much they need, and how to make best use of it. And so we have expanded our agent network, and wherever it's been safe to do so, had them out and about more than usual, talking to people about the benefits of insurance or their existing policies, and making sure that people knew when they had benefits that they were making most use of that. What's that meant for us? We're going to have a fantastic year. We're probably going to grow more than 40% our revenues this year because we had strong momentum, because we'd worked hard as a family in the years preceding this to put ourselves in a good position, but also because this pandemic highlights, I think, the need for savings. If you talk about resilience as an individual, not just as an economy, then the first step to resilience is having savings. And also some insurance, and then it's also highlighted the need that everybody was aware of, but for access to healthcare. And so our products have never been more valuable to customers. Now, there's probably going to be an issue in the near term about affordability, but in terms of people's desire and need to save, to protect their families, and to get better access to healthcare, this crisis has only highlighted how important those things are. So where do we go from here? We're just as committed to Africa as we were, in January, and so we're moving our regional headquarters to Nairobi. We'll be there early in the new year. We're excited to be doing that, to be planting roots on the continent. We're going to continue investing in our people. We've got a very strong culture. We think we're one of the best places to work in Africa. We're determined to get better at that, and so we're continuing to invest in training and development, but also in listening to our people. And so as I said, for instance, one of the things that has become clear to us this year is that the pandemic's had has had an impact on mental health that has often been overlooked. It's been a very stressful time for millions and millions of people, and we need to acknowledge that if we want our workforce to be as productive and engaged as we would like them to be. And then the last thing is investing in in technology. Emma talked about fintech and how important it is. And we really agree. And for us, we see that technology has a chance, where it has the biggest chance to impact people's lives is where there are products or services that either where customers aren't getting a service or a product that's as good as they should, or where they're paying more than they need to for access to a product or a service. And we see that healthcare in particular in Africa is an area where both of those things are true, and that technology has a huge role to play in improving the quality of the service, but also reducing the cost of that service. And we've been building a health-based ecosystem across Asia in the last couple of years. It's got more than 10 million users across Asia right now. And we launched it in Kenya a couple of weeks ago. We're going to have it launched in all of our African markets by the end of Q1. It's called Pulse. And it's got a range of services, all centered around helping individuals to manage their health, whether it's prevention, information, or actual healthcare, and managing the way that they pay for health as well, whether it's through insurance or savings or other mechanisms, from things like artificial intelligence symptoms checkers to actually using technology as a way of telemedicine. So providing people with access to analog human doctors, but over things like this. We see the opportunity in a lot of African countries where distances can be large, or traffic can be a problem, where payment for health insurance is difficult, where people are unsure about access to the right kind of healthcare services. We think that the technology and in particular telemedicine has got a huge role to play in the future of healthcare in Africa, and we're investing very heavily in rolling out our health-based ecosystem across Africa, because we think that it can break a lot of the compromises that people have to make when they're thinking about insuring their families.
Thank you very much, Matt. I think from what you've said, there are a few important takeaways, and knowing Pru's business really well, I know also within your work in healthcare programs, there's a big focus on well-being and mental health and all of those things, as you've said. And I think with savings, I mean, the thing is, just the focus, as we're saying, we're going to talk a lot with Henny about the focus on individuals as well within organizations. And if people don't have savings and they are not healthy, they can't get up every day and do the things they're meant to do for themselves and their communities. So those are absolutely key things, being able to look after ourselves and being able to look after others. And I think one other thing from what you've said, I'd really like to highlight as a takeaway. When we spoke yesterday, you spoke about, the long-term view. And I know that on the life side, Prudential is a business that is a long-term business. It's also an institutional investor. And I think, while there are very serious things going on, the fact that your revenues have gone up 40% is from sticking to a long-term strategy, being optimistic about Africa in the long term, and doing all the things for your staff and your organization to make sure that you can be a part of that opportunity. And Henny, I'm sure many of the things that Matt said about, motivating your staff and being a good place to work is quite resonant with you. And we'll come to that in a moment. But I also think something else that Matt said that people underestimate is just how big the continent is. And you have to get so many little and big parcels and messages to people all over the continent. And, as I said to you the other day, one thing we know about DHL is if you want something done and you don't want any disasters, you DHL it. And Henny, with 51 countries in such a big subcontinent, please tell us what's going on and how are you doing it?
Thank you, Des. Now, I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what's going on, but let me have a stab at it. So firstly, thank you for the introduction and having me here. I think the story of DHL is a long and a very proud one. As you've mentioned, we are present in all 51 countries. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the only company in the world to be here. And I think for me, we talk about defying market forces, and I think, there's a wonderful story here. And maybe just to give it a little bit of context and perspective to it, less than 12 cities in Africa are serviced or used to be serviced pre-COVID with one commercial flight a week. Now you can imagine with COVID, all of that disappeared. Now I think what a lot of people don't realize is a continent like Africa is very much dependent on that commercial belly space in order to keep logistics going. And frankly, if you don't keep logistics going, you can't keep the economy going. Now, we're very fortunate from the point of view that we've got our own dedicated air fleet in Africa, and we're the only logistics company that has that. And we've got 15 dedicated aircraft in Africa. Traditionally, though, pre-COVID, the bulk of the aircraft were stationed in Nigeria, and we used 9 aircraft to service that West Africa belt for us, because that was the area that was the poorest service in terms of commercial belly capacity, as we fondly referred to it. With COVID striking and the commercial aircraft disappearing, and therefore the belly space disappearing, we had to rejig our airframes across Africa. And we suddenly had to bring on additional aircraft to service East Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands, as well as Southern Africa. So I think that's one of, we talk about defying market forces, and that was one of the benefits that we had from a logistics company perspective, and from 50 years worth of building and planning, I guess that you can say. So that's one of the real success stories for us, is the fact that we were able to rejig. I think another real success story for us is DHL, but not just for us as DHL, for us as a continent, is we continue and we have and continue to serve on many advisory boards for governments. And in South Africa and Mauritius, to use 2 examples, we were pretty instrumental in getting the airwaves opened up soon after those hard lockdowns started happening. And that's quite important if you start thinking about how do you support the healthcare system, how do you support a food network in the agricultural system, how do you keep economies going, to go back to kind of the overarching topic. So from that perspective, it's been a really interesting time for us. It's been an incredibly successful time for us, very similar to Matt's story. We're in a quiet period. We're going to be announcing our Q3 results next week. But suffice to say that we have seen incredibly aggressive growth as a result of COVID. But we've also seen many interesting things playing out on this continent as a result of COVID. Digitalization, for one, has become a very important part of life on this continent. And it's quite interesting if you read up a little bit on it. Popular research or theory says that if you improve the internet access by 10%, you'll add 4 percentage points to the GDP in Africa. I think one of the things that COVID has done for us, it's accelerated that uptake and that growth in the digital area. And that's also helped us with cross-border trade. And if I talk about us, I'll talk about the continent. And we've seen from a logistics perspective a lot more intra-Africa cross-border trade, particularly from our SMEs, which is quite an important part of our economies across Africa. But I think the key, and Matt, you've really kind of hit on the key for the last 10 years from a DHL perspective. We've always said that the very first pillar of our 4-pillar strategy is all about motivated people. And in my conversation with you, Des, now I said the other day, I wish I could replace the uniforms for my people with Superwoman or Superman capes, because every single DHL employee right now, in my eyes, is a superhero. And why is that? Well, it's really quite simple. DHL was one of the very first essential service providers that were declared and acknowledged during COVID. And if you just think about it logically, these couriers that knocks on your door to either pick up or deliver a parcel is exposed so many more times than any one of us in our little protective environments. Yet not a single one of those guys hesitated for a nanosecond to take up the task and say, we're going to walk this road with you. And that for me is the amazing thing. And why is it amazing? Because we're a purpose-driven company. DHL's got a very firm belief that our purpose is to help make the world a better place. And we do that by improving lives and connecting people. And that's really the key in terms of the people motivation, because every individual suddenly realized that he or she can play an active role in that, no matter how big or how small. But every single one of my employees can go back every single day and declare to their family back home that mommy or daddy today has been a superhero. And that's really been the driving force behind our success. So those are a couple of the success stories. What we have seen with the uptake of digitalization is a real aggressive growth in e-commerce. And the interesting part, isn't it, in all of this is that it's e-commerce outbound, not inbound. Traditionally, Africa is very much an inbound continent. You generally have, for every shipment that goes out, you've got 2 shipments coming in, and we've seen a rebalance of that happening as a result of the aggressive growth in e-commerce. And typically what we've seen going out is going out to the diaspora, particularly to the States and to Europe. And it's particularly around herbal medicine, traditional medicine, and a little bit of fashion. So we're really excited in terms of what COVID has meant for the acceleration and the uptake of e-commerce and the digitalization that sits behind that, but also in particular about how it's accelerated the growth, this outbound growth and volumes on the continent. Africa has got a really important role to play economically in the world. And again, my absolute view, and we've got a fair amount of statistics, I guess, to prove that, is to say that we've now seen Africa taking up a far more aggressive place in the world economy, albeit still small, but a lot more aggressive. Lots of interesting areas for us. Agriculture, I heard somebody talk about agriculture earlier on, a real important part on the continent, and we're seeing a lot of activity around that. So there's lots of green sprouts coming out of Africa as a result of COVID. We talk about the employment of people. We've been one of those fortunate organizations that as a result of the volume growth that we've seen, that we've had to go on a very aggressive recruitment drive. And as I sit here today, on average, we probably try and recruit between 30 and 50 heads a day. And we have been doing so for a good number of weeks. And that's just really one, to cater for the volume growth that we've seen, both in and outbound on the continent, but also for peak period. We know that traditionally, as you go into the Christmas celebration period, that e-commerce volumes pick up. With our growth that we suddenly see outbound, we absolutely know for sure, given on our global history, that we will see a very similar trend in terms of volume growth. So for us, really, really a good story. In terms of people, I've spoken about a motivated workforce and the fact that in my eyes, they're all absolute superheroes. A little bit to Matt's point, the mental wellness was quite an important thing. I think people don't necessarily realize that when we say we've mobilized the workforce, what it really means, because not everybody has got the luxury of a 2 or a 3 bedroom house where they can go and just work out a little space for themselves to sit and work. So in many instances, we had to supply little solar packs for people so they can be online, so they do have access to some form of power or electricity. But the important part is that we've launched a wellness app, and through that wellness app, we very specifically focused on the mental wellness aspect as well as the physical wellness. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of intercontinental challenges, whether people wanted to start walking 1 kilometer or 10 kilometers, whether people took up cycling and went for a cycle for 10 kilometers or 400 kilometers like I recently did. So it doesn't matter, but the point was very simply that we recognized early on that that's going to be a really important part to help keep this workforce motivated and keep them out there at the forefront of where things are happening as an essential service provider. So lots of things I can still probably touch on, Desney, but I'll probably pause there.
Thank you so much, Henny. So for me, 2 big takeaways. You know, as I've stressed, something that has struck me from speaking to all of you so far, certainly your leadership style is one of optimism and believing that what you put into the world is what you get out of the world. And I think clearly people not afraid to roll up your sleeves as well and get stuck in and support people when necessary. Because I think that's really important. You know, we're talking about defying market forces. So every single person listening to this, you know, whatever your job is, if you big or small, if you just do the best you can every single day, that's what's going to drive the recovery. And, you know, supporting others, supporting your colleagues, your families, to make sure that everybody is in a good mental space in order to come out of this. And that's what, for me, Defying Market Forces is very much about the culture in which we do business. Then the other thing I think that Henny said was extremely important, and I'm sure we've heard quite a lot of this from other panelists today during the event, is Africa's growing economic and politically strategic role on the global stage, not just the UK, as we've heard from Emma, but also we had last year the Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi. $20 billion invested there from Russia. In September 2018, we had $56 billion from China. We had $45 billion from the EU. So clearly, people are realizing with the kind of political risks that we see in other markets that Africa is actually a means of diversification, and there's political risk everywhere. I think this is going to be extremely interesting with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala now being elected to the head of the World Trade Organization. And I think the Afro-Continental Free Trade Agreement, Henny, a really important part of making that work, as the EU is, been struggling to hold together. I think Africans are trying to actually create a single market on the continent, and that is very much going to be able to require getting things able to move across borders. And then, of course, Samad, somebody's got to pay for all of this, right? So, and finance all of this activity and investment. So, Samad, do you want to maybe just talk us through your role at Standard Chartered supporting businesses and investors, and some of the ways and initiatives that your COVID response has supported the community?
Thank you, Desney. So, we, as the bank Standard Chartered, are present in Africa for more than 100 years. It depends which country you're talking about, but in many countries, more than close to 150 years. And we are very proud of the fact it's a key differentiator and distinguishing factor for us. We're present in 15 countries. To the best of my knowledge, more than any other bank, including African banks globally. We are a full-service bank across most African markets. What does that mean? That means that we are doing financial intermediation in every segment of society. So if I pick retail banking on one spectrum, and you pick investment banking, we do each one of these. And our model is different than most of the other global financial institutions in a big way. We are present on the ground. We have close to 5,000, if not more than 5,000 people on the ground in the continent. Our teams are basically made up of local teams. In addition to that, our African talent is a big talent globally for the organization. Many of our African talent is working across the globe in many different countries, including Dubai, where I am based. In terms of what we do and what we look to do, is our basic role, in my sense, is we are a connector of capital. We bring the right capital to the right kind of projects and opportunities. And whether it is in the financial markets, whether it is in the debt capital markets or in the loan markets. There is no doubt about the fact that COVID has come as a Six Sigma event for the entire world, including Africa. And some of the colleagues, Matt and Hanny, spoke about the disruption. And absolutely, we have seen it. We have seen it firsthand, and the impact of that disruption has been quite debilitating on financial markets. I think thanks to the help of global regulators, regional regulators, and country regulators, we have been able to manage this blow for our clients across the board in each one of the African markets. And some of the debt forbearance delay schemes we have participated in each one of those to support our clients to make the blow easier in very many situations. How we're dealing with this crisis and what do I look into going forward? Our view is very simple, Disney. We are open for business. We were never closed, not even in the dark days of April and May. We are open, we are pitching. We are prolific in terms of reaching out to clients. And we have found ways like the whole world in terms of communicating digitally, and we are making good use of it. We have closed some of our biggest landmark deals across infrastructure space during the COVID times. We have originated some very large deals during the COVID times. At the same time, I'm not oblivious to the fact that the continent, from a financial banking markets perspective, has taken a hit. It has been downgraded, in some cases more than one notch, by a number of different rating agencies. And it has seen the impact of liquidity tightening in some situations, and it has seen the impact of dollars and hard currency reserves becoming crimped. In short, we think our view is that Africa is going to bounce back more resiliently and more quickly than many other markets. For example, if I was to compare with countries in Western Europe, my view would be Africa will rebound much quicker. Africa has a young population, and Africa has a lot of energy, and the demand for growth is significantly higher. So we are a believer in Africa. We continue to deploy capital, and we are looking forward to the future. Our view is that 2021 will be a much stronger year, much better year for Africa. And we think, parts of the world are going into the second wave of COVID. We hope it comes out sooner. Our view is that Africa will do much better in 2021, and we are very eager to be participant in that as we have been.
Great. Sarmad, there's actually a question that's come in just for you, very much related to the last point that you made. And they want to know, Sarmad, which market is Standard Chartered looking at? Which is the most exciting African market, in your opinion, post or during COVID?
Well, listen, it's a tough question. The market I pick and the market I don't pick, I will have to say.
It's putting you in the hot seat there.
But listen, I'll give you some anecdotal. Our biggest business, I would think, and it would be a tight race across many of the countries. I would say our biggest business as a region would be West Africa. And we have a massive business in Nigeria, and we're a big fan of our business in Nigeria. And probably the biggest presence across the continent in terms of size, scale, and human capital will be in Nigeria. So if you ask me to put it in a slightly different way, where do I get personally involved in terms of spending my time across the continent? I probably would think West Africa and Nigeria would be the answer.
Absolutely. And they say by 2100, 1 in 3 people in the world would be Nigerian or Ethiopian, given the current population growth rates. So extremely big consumer markets, extremely big labor markets, lots of potential to sell goods and services all over the continent. We have a question, not an easy question. So I'll ask for a volunteer to take this question, because the audience is asking some very tough questions. So does the panel think that the African governments have done enough to support local businesses post-COVID? Who wants to take that one? Okay, well, maybe I'll take that one then, because I also host the African Business podcast, and I've been fortunate this year, actually during October, I spoke to the head of Africa at the International Monetary Fund, Abebe Amaro Selassie, and he's been coordinating a lot of the big financial aid packages from the fund itself, and also working in tandem with other institutions like the African Development Bank in order to provide support packages to governments. I think, look, we need to understand, the kind of spending that we've seen, here in the UK, in Europe, and also the US, where almost a sort of Keynesianism, a kind of spending. I think, to hear a Conservative Chancellor spending as much money as Rishi Sunak has, the response in Europe and in the US has been really robust. But the thing is, African countries don't have the same sort of fiscal space. But that being said, I know that in South Africa, for example, the government has put in support for SMEs. And also what's interesting is the private sector, and this panel being very much about the private sector, works often together with the government providing support. South Africa, for example, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has got the Solidarity Fund, working with corporate members in its remit, because they're very much the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange believes that, as corporate citizens, there's accountability as well to be good actors in those environments. And in Africa, certainly things are a little bit more complex. Often it requires private and public actors working together. Have governments done enough? I think they've done very well in terms of the best way, as I said, to support businesses is to control the virus. And I think the governments have been extremely good in explaining the risks to people and the hardship that they've had to endure and why it's necessary. Henny, while you were away...
Yes, may I add a little bit to what you...
Of course you may, yes.
Okay, so our view would be that I completely agree what you are saying, and I think in almost every country the governments have done a lot. I would also think that in many situations, in many countries, the governments it's a delicate balance to strike. What do I mean by that? Africa needs the world, and the world needs Africa. And that balance is an important one in terms of, and I'm talking more from a financial perspective. I appreciate that might be not the spirit of the question, but from a financial perspective, it's very important that whatever the governments do, by and large, it remains bankable at the international standards, where they continue to attract investors, where they continue to attract private capital. And I think that's the fine balance and the delicate balance which the governments work very hard to strike. And I would like to give the governments more credit because they have to look at all these aspects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that Abebe Selassie had said, that actually it's very, very smart right now to go to the IMF, because you're going to get a lot of capital at almost 0% rates. So if there's any time to borrow from the fund, it's now. Especially where we're used to quite high interest rates for the cost of capital on the continent. Henny, while you're away, questions come through for you. Also, we've got our audience is asking some tough questions here, but yours is, Henny, what is the main challenge for logistic industries in Africa, particularly in East Africa? Presumably there are infrastructure needs, but other than that, what are the obstacles for private logistics providers to enter the African market, and how is DHL overcoming them? So about 5 questions in one there.
I heard that. That'll serve me well to fall off the network, I guess. So look, I think there is a couple. Infrastructure is probably top of the list. There's absolutely no doubt. There's not a lot of companies that can have their own airline. We're incredibly privileged that we do have that. So infrastructure is number 1 on the list. Number 2 is we need an absolute mind shift or a change of mindset, particularly around customs authorities. And we need customs authorities to become enablers and not gatekeepers. And there's a fundamental and a very important difference between the two. The third thing that I would say is that's going to be critical for Africa moving forward is the successful implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement. I think therein lies the key for unlocking the economic potential intra-Africa and intercontinental for us. How are we responding to that? Look, I've hopefully covered enough in terms of what we've done from an aircraft perspective. At the moment, we probably run between 22 and 24 aircraft that's dedicated to Africa to keep the economies going. Some of those are our own, some are freight planes that we've chartered in and will continue to charter for as long as the lack of commercial belly space is around. And then we continue on behalf of the industry to lobby officials and government bodies across the continent. And I must just make a point that I have seen a significant shift in the willingness across the continent to change and to become more competitive. And I think there's one statistic that I do want to share. If you look at the World Bank index of ease of doing business, Sub-Saharan Africa has been the region with the highest number of reforms each year since 2012. And 1/3 of all business regulatory reforms recorded by doing business in 2019 were from the Sub-Saharan economies. So really lots of good news. It means that pre-COVID, this wave of change started, and I suspect that COVID will accelerate that understanding for the need to change. So lots of opportunity still for us. I hope that answers the questions.
Yes, very good. Very, very good, big, little answer. So I'm going to try and do quite a lot in the remaining 4 minutes. Emma, we've got a question for you. And then I also want to try and invite Matt and anyone else, if we have time, for some final thoughts. But Emma, there's a question for you specifically. It's given the recent news around the Kenya-UK trade agreements and the importance around fintech and manufacturing for UK government-Africa relations. What sectors are the most important now for future trade agreements?
What a great question. We talk about it quite a lot. I mean, I think in terms of the whole trade policy area, there are two key things. One is around how do you build more of the free trade agreements and build that network, a stronger network. And frankly, there's another bit, which is actually how do you deal with the non-tariff barriers stuff? How do you deal with the stuff that isn't captured in free trade agreements? And it speaks to Henny's point there about customs authorities and the business environment and that sort of thing. So we're working on both areas. How do we tackle the market access barriers? How do we support governments making the right decisions about the regulatory environment, about legislation and so on? But also, what are the next steps in terms of free trade and the trading arrangements? So we would love to see more countries come on board with the existing network of free trade agreements that we've got. And then we would love to start those conversations around how do you create new chapters, whether it's in services or it's in IP. How do we kind of look afresh at the arrangements that sit within those agreements? So we're really excited about what we can start to do next year. Big focus has been around continuity, and then next year really is about how do we build forward from that.
Okay, so we have exactly 2 minutes. Matt, I think if you can maybe say 58 seconds or so, offer any final thoughts, because we've not come back to you yet. Maybe on financial sector deepening and working with what used to be DFID, but now FCDO. I'm sure that you work quite a lot on some of the capital markets, coherence and consolidation.
Sure, Desney, and if you take a long-term view, I think the COVID crisis from an economic point of view is just noise in the long-term economic development, and it doesn't change any of the trends that we're investing behind and will continue to invest behind. There's a big job to be done in investing in awareness of the benefits of financial resilience, but also in making financial products simpler, easier to understand and easier to access. And the same is true of health, and that's our mission for the next few years.
Great, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any closing thoughts before we get kicked off? Great. Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone on this panel. It's been, for me, fantastic. I love moderating with people like yourselves. It's just a masterclass in leadership and taking things forward. And I just say for myself personally, thank you for everything you do every day. I think all the things that you're talking about is exactly the kind of initiatives that we need to come through the crisis stronger. And I think from my part, I'm very enthused as well to hear the focus on well-being, but also on sustainable finance and green initiatives, because, while there's a lot of economic development to be done in Africa, it'd be great to see that happening in a way that supports renewables and sustainable and inclusive outcomes for everyone on the continent. So that's all from me today.